Hey everyone, I'm back today with a video, this time talking about how we would figure out how much a sacred shard is worth to us. So Plarium will give us a price in deals about how much they think a sacred shard is and how much they think we're willing to spend on it. But to figure out if we're willing to buy an offer, we need to know how much each item in that offer is worth to us. So today I'm just going to do a little exploring about how much a sacred shard is worth to me and how much it is if you use kind of a normal valuation for what I'm about to talk about first is an ancient shard. So throughout this analysis, I'm going to use how much we value an ancient shard to figure out how much a sacred shard is worth. Now, in the shop, every single day, you can buy a single ancient shard for $1. If you buy this every single day, that means you value an ancient shard at least $1. And I'm just going to say for simplicity that it means you value it at $1. If you don't buy this every day, it means that in general, you value an ancient shard at less than $1. And I don't buy it every day on my main account, which means I value an ancient shard at less than $1. In the spreadsheet that I use for evaluating offers, I actually value it at about 75 cents. So when I'm talking about how much a sacred shard is going to be worth, I'm going to talk about it first if an ancient shard is worth $1, and second if an ancient shard to you is worth 75 cents. So I'm going to look at both of those two cases. Obviously, the same type of analysis is going to be true regardless of how you price an ancient shard. So you'll be able to figure out how much a sacred shard is worth to you just by knowing how much you think an ancient shard is worth. So before we can kind of jump into that, we do need to talk a little bit about probability, and that's going to guide us in figuring out how much a sacred shard is worth. So for a quick example, think about flipping a coin. If you get heads, you win, and if you get tails, you lose. So on an individual coin flip, you have a 50% chance of winning. Now, what if we were instead curious about the chance of winning at least one time when we flip 3 coins? Right? So what we would want to look at is the probability that we lose all 3 of those times, because that'll tell us how often we don't win at least once. So in the first coin flip, we have a 50% chance of losing. The second one, we have a 50% chance of losing. And in the third one, we have a 50% chance of losing. So what you actually need to do is multiply those probabilities together. So it'll be 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5, or 0.5 to the third, and that'll tell us how often we would expect to not get at least one winning flip if we flip a coin 3 times. So to do that, let's just open up our handy calculator real quick. And we will be doing 0.5 to the third, and that tells us 0.125. So 12.5% of the time, we don't win a single coin flip. So 87.5% of the time, if we flip 3 coins, we're going to win at least once. So the question that you might have now is, how does that help us at all here? Well, an ancient shard you can kind of look at as a weird coin, right? So if we look at ancient shards and how much they're worth, we see that 91.5% of the time you get a rare, 8% of the time you get an epic, and 0.5% of the time you get a legendary. So for the moment, let's just consider legendaries. So a sacred shard, you have 6% chance of getting a legendary. So we're kind of curious, how many ancient shards do we need to open to have about the same percent chance of getting a legendary for opening the ancients? Now, thankfully, it works out in this particular case that you can add up this and say like, okay, well, I probably need about 12 ancients. So if we look at this, so we want to see what is the probability that we don't get a legendary. So that's our probability of losing. So 0.995, that is the percentage that we would not get a legendary. Now let's do that to the 12th power, because we're saying like this is our guess. This is how much we think we would need to open to have the same as a sacred shard. And it's actually slightly worse than opening a sacred shard, right? Now, it's not a huge deal, because it's 0.1% difference. But that means that in general, if we open 12 ancient shards, we're equally as likely to open a sacred shard. It's not exact, so if we're opening hundreds or potentially thousands of ancients over the lifetime of an account, that does make a difference, but about 12 ancient shards is what we would expect, just thinking about it, and it turns out that that's the case. So the problem is, we look at that and now we wonder, well, we're ignoring epics, right? So we only looked at legendaries. So let's consider what happens if we say, what is the probability of us not getting an epic or a legendary if we open 12 shards? So let's clear this. Now, that means we'd be getting a rare in each one. So we would look at 0.915 to the 12. So about a third of the time, if we open 12 ancients, we don't get a sacred shard. So your response to me then would be, well, obviously a sacred shard must be worth more than 12 ancients, right? Because you're guaranteed to get an epic. And here, a third of the time, you wouldn't get an epic. Now, this assumes that you don't open during a 2x event. So what happens if you do open during a 2x event? Well, that will be 0.83 to the 12, because 8.5 plus 8.5 is 17, so 1 minus 0.17 is 0.83. We do this, and it's 0.106. So about 1 in 10 times, if you open your ancient shards during a 2x event, you will be not getting a single epic or a legendary. So that is not too bad, right? Like, we kind of assume that this is going to be roughly equivalent in terms of just opening things. A sacred shard is still slightly better, but if you do value the epic, there is something we need to consider. So what's the chance that we get at least 2 epic or legendaries? Now, this is a slightly more complicated expression, so you'll just need to trust me for the moment. But if we do this 10%, then we need to think, what is the probability that we get exactly 1 epic or legendary? And that will be 12 times 0.83 to the 11th times 0.17. So 26% of the time is when we get exactly 1 rare or epic. We had 10% of the time we didn't get any, which means 36% chance, so a little over a third of the time, is when we get less than 2 epics or legendaries. So if we open our ancient shards during a 2x event, 2/3 of the time it is better than opening a sacred shard. So to me, I would only be valuing a sacred shard as worth at most 12 ancients. Now, this does ignore the point that sacred shards do give more points for the summon rush events, and that's not negligible, especially for a fusion. So that means maybe you need to add a couple of dollars on if you're saving your sacred shards for a summon rush. But if you're saving your sacreds for a 2x instead, then it doesn't actually make a difference here. Like, you would still want to be buying ancients if you can't get a sacred shard for 12 times the cost of an ancient. So that means, for me, if I value an ancient shard at 75 cents, we have 12 ancient shards times 0.75 is $9. So I only value a sacred shard at $9. And if you value an ancient shard, or I only value a sacred shard at $9. If you value an ancient shard at $1, that means if you're opening your ancient shards in 2x events, a sacred shard is worth at most $12. So if you are willing to be patient and wait for 2 times ancient events, you should never buy a sacred shard that cost more than $12. How often do you see deals that have sacred shards at more than $12? And it's basically every sacred shard event that or deal I've ever seen has valued at more than $12. So I don't buy packs that have sacred shards in them because they tend to be too expensive for me. Now, with this in mind, this isn't just true for dollars. This is something to keep in mind for the bazaar as well. Because we saw the preliminary cost of ancient shards and sacred shards. Ancient shards looked to be 1,000 gold bars, and sacred shards were 24,000 gold bars. So that means you should not save up your gold bars for sacred shards, because you should be saving them for ancients instead if you're trying to get a non-void champion. So that is just one more thing to keep in mind, that in most instances in the game, if you have the choice between sacred shards and ancient shards, the vast majority of the time you're going to want to choose ancients, because 12 ancients is just as good, if not better, than a single sacred shard if you're waiting for 2 times, and it tends to be much cheaper for you to get 12 ancients than it is 1 sacred. So that's all I had for today. I just wanted to give that quick analysis, and hopefully I will see you guys in my stream tonight. I stream every single day at 7 Central Time. So I hope to see you there, and have a great day.